Welcome to Legislature This Week, brought to you by West Virginia News, the State Journal, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Legislature This Week is sponsored by Mon Health Systems, as well as SEVA WV and the West Virginia High Technology Consortium. In today's first segment, we welcome Senator Patrick Martin, who's representing the counties of Harrison, Lewis, Braxton, and Clay. Welcome, Patrick, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be on.
Also with us for this first segment is West Virginia News Senior Government Affairs writer Charles Young.
Hi, good morning, Senator. So, as John just listed off the counties that you're now representing, that's a little bit of a shift after our redistricting. Could you tell us a little bit about how you have familiarized yourself with, the new parts of your district and how that's changed, your governing style and your priorities this session?
Yeah, so the district actually he named off as my old district. My new district has half of Taylor County, all of Harrison, Lewis, all of Gilmer County, and Calhoun County. So I no longer have Braxton or Clay. I had half of Gilmer County before, but now just have the full part. I have some family from Calhoun County. Of course, Gilmer County is very close to Lewis County where I live. So, it is a different district, but that's just, the unfortunate part about redistricting is, you just get a new district, but I'm glad to have the new district. I'm excited about it. Been getting out and meeting as many people as I can and, excited about it.
Is it a more rural district since the redistricting process?
I would say it's about the same. Calhoun County and Gilmer County is very rural, along with Lewis County. Taylor County, it's about half of Taylor County, so also, it's pretty rural, which Harrison County is a larger county. So, that's a majority of my district as far as population goes is just in Harrison County. I think it equates to about 60-65% of the district.
Sure. Okay, well, now, I also wanted to ask you about a couple of the bills that you're the lead sponsor of, these firearms-related bills, SB 182 and 184. Talk a little bit about why those are priorities for you.
Well, on the one bill, it talks about non-discriminating against firearm companies on financial institutions. Our state treasurer, Riley Moore, has been an advocate on passing similar legislation when it relates to our natural gas or coal industry, and he's really been a champion on the national level. And I think that also should apply to guns. I think that guns and the Second Amendment is very important to my voters and the constituents of West Virginia. And I think that one thing we need to do is just protect that at all costs. We shouldn't be providing money and financial help to these institutions that are discriminating against our values here in West Virginia.
Okay, and the other one has to do with declaring firearms essential businesses during declared emergencies. Is this sort of a reaction to the way gun stores were classified during the beginning of the pandemic?
Yeah, Now, we didn't see as much in West Virginia as some of the other states did, but, I just wanted to protect, if one day we would have a state of emergency that, I believe the Second Amendment is to protect yourself, and I believe it's a constitutional right. And so I think that when the government starts shutting businesses down or having them temporarily close their doors, I think that's taking away your Second Amendment. And I think that, if anything, that's probably the time that you should be bearing arms, in the case of a pandemic or however.
Patrick, the halfway point of the session is coming up very quickly. What do you see as the major accomplishments so far?
Well, I think that looking at some of the PEIA stuff, I know that's a lot of our constituents are really affected by the PEIA issue, and I think that really digging into it has been great. I think holding our budget line also on keeping a steady budget over the last few years and trying to continue to do so. I'm really hopeful that we get something done with the income tax this year. I know it's everybody's kind of anticipating on what's the Senate going to do, and so I'm really excited about that. And I'm glad that we've gone through the process on learning, where our budget is. We have base builders that are going to increase our budget every year, but yet we don't exactly know where we're going to be if we have those, those base builders, where we're going to be at in 5 years. So I'm glad that we've taken a look at it, and I feel comfortable about it.
Do you believe that a permanent fix for PEIA is in the immediate future, or is that going to be something you guys are going to have to work on for a couple of years?
I think it's going to have to be something we work on in a couple of years. I believe it's 2012, the PEIA premiums were frozen, where the state picked up the second, it used to be an 80-20 split, and then the state started picking up a portion of it to try to not have anybody have big increases in their premiums. Well, when we put money into it, now we've kind of gotten ourselves in a spot where, if we allow the employee to start paying their 20% again, they're going to see a massive increase in their premiums. And, that's going to be really, especially with inflation, I think that'll be really detrimental to a lot of our state employees.
I want to come back to the tax issue in a minute, but I know one of the committees you serve on that you're very active in, an area that West Virginia has been very strong in is economic development. Tell us about your work there.
Well, it's a great committee. As vice chair, we've really looked at what can we do to help current businesses in the state, but also bring new businesses in and bring good careers, not just jobs, but careers in West Virginia. And, I think that we have a lot going on with economic development right now. We have the Forum Energy, we have Nucor, we have the Berkshire Hathaway, and just looking at how can we bring additional companies like that into West Virginia, and how can we continue to expand to have good careers so we can, all West Virginians can work and raise a family here and stay here. That was one of the main reasons why I ran, was just doing everything I can to keep the kids that I went to school with to stay here in the state of West Virginia and not move to Charlotte, not move to Florida, to stay right here in West Virginia. And so, that's very important in order for them to stay here, we have to make sure that we give them a good job and a good way to raise a family.
Now, your background's in small business, correct?
Yes,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I have a small business and run a small business in Lewis County.
Okay. Do you believe West Virginia is doing enough for small business owners? And if not, what else can we do to help spur that along?
Well, I think that, over this is my 7th year, I think we've done some great strides. I don't think everything can happen overnight. I think, it is a slow process. We all kind of joke about when we all get elected, we're going to change the world and make everything better overnight, but you quickly learn that that's just not the case. So, I think with some of the tort reforms that we've done is huge. I think that some of the tax reliefs that we have done is great, tax credits, encouraging those businesses to come back to West Virginia. So there's always more we can do, but I think we've taken some great strides on keeping businesses here and helping the businesses that are here to grow.
So you would definitely agree that since day one when you walked in the Capitol to this point now, you think West Virginia is more business friendly?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I think we can see it with Nucor coming in, the Berkshire Hathaway, the Forum Energy. I think that we've really adapted to, not only is this a short-term change, but we're going to continue to work on economic development and what can we do to help you to bring your businesses here to West Virginia.
Before we go back to those two big issues that you started your conversation with, taxation and PEIA, I do want to ask you, because you're a young guy, you and Ben Queen are both young, you represent the area well.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about what's your message to the young people of West Virginia. We hear, oh, I'm going to leave, or how do we change that brain drain?
Well, I think it all starts with jobs. The kids I went to school with are all the ones that have moved away, have looked for a better career, and I think that the changes that we are making here in West Virginia has made a tremendous difference on bringing those good careers here, and just hang in there. I feel like that we're going to continue to bring those jobs here and keep growing our economy, and so stay here. This is where you grew up, and it's a beautiful state. I think that we with our 4 seasons and just the atmosphere, the climate of everything, I just really feel like that you just hang in there. I think we have the best state in the nation.
You said earlier that you don't think PEIA, can be totally fixed this session. What type of timeline would you like to give it as a state senator? When would you like to see it? We heard, I think, some figures, some projections said by 2027 it could be really bad again. Is that the date you're looking at, or is there another date you're looking at?
Yeah, so when the state picked up the other 20%, or not quite 20%, but we picked up a large portion of the employees' portion. It is draining our account pretty quickly because it's costing us a lot more. I mean, healthcare, when you go to the doctor's office, is just costing a lot more. And the projections that some of the experts are telling us, this is 2027. That's when we'll start to deplete some of that money. So we can put some money into it now, or we can try to find a permanent fix. I think that everybody's looking at every avenue. I know since I came into the legislature, when I was in the House of Delegates, that was one of the top priorities: is what can we do, what are we going to do, and that's a lot of that insurance stuff is over my head, but we just have to listen to the experts and see what they can recommend to us, and just kind of go from there. I think it's a very difficult. It's not as easy fix as just either throwing money at it or having an employer or employee pick up their portion. I think it's a lot more complex than that.
About the income tax plan, the Governor Justice has been ramrodding, and then you have the machinery and property tax debate and things like that. I mean, which one does reach the goal of keeping West Virginians here or bringing people into the state better? I mean, what's your belief?
My belief is I believe the income tax is the most important. I think that the personal property tax isn't the machine and inventory tax. I think that would have brought businesses here to West Virginia. But to me, the number one most important thing is the income tax. Also, our voters voted against elimination of the personal property tax and machine and inventory. And I think that the voters come first, that they spoke, and we need to listen. When our constituents speak, we need to start, when they start speaking, we need to start listening and saying, hey, you all spoke, this is what you want. And so I think the most important thing at this time is income tax. We have a huge surplus in the state. And, real quick is a lot of my constituents are saying, so if you all cut income tax, what taxes are you going to raise to pay it? And, the key is we don't have to raise taxes. We have a huge surplus. Yes, we have some expenses that we need to look at, investments to put in West Virginia, but we don't have to because we've held a flatline budget for so many years since being down here. And so, I think that's very important.
You've campaigned as very much a fiscal conservative, correct? I mean,
absolutely, yes.
Low tax guy, correct? So, some of the stuff we've heard is about trying to implement the governor's 50% tax cut in year one instead of extending it out. But then the other thing we heard is that some people were floating about raising the sales tax. What's your thoughts on those two elements?
I believe that we have enough money to cut the income tax without raising any other tax. Now, in the past years, I think the last 3 years, there's been a vote in front of me to raise the sales tax in order to cut the income tax, and I voted against it every time. I feel like that you shouldn't raise one tax to cut another tax. Now, studies show that sales tax doesn't grow our economy like the income tax does. The income tax is much more important. But I feel like that we can cut it now without having to raise any taxes. So, at this point in our state's financial situation, I feel like we should just cut the income tax and just go home. I think that that's the more money that goes in the pockets of our constituents, the more money they spend, at small businesses and help grow the economy. I think it'll move people here too. So I think it's just very important.
So if the governor's tax plan or a Senate plan cutting taxes 50% year one reaches the floor, you're a yes vote?
Yes, I will vote yes. And, I'm a big supporter, or I'm a big opponent of saying I don't want to do the machine and inventory tax rebates. I know that maybe I'm a outlier in some of the caucus. I know talking with some of my colleagues, they agree with that. But I feel like that what we need to do is just cut the income tax. And, the voters spoke on the personal property tax.
Excellent. Charles, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, thank
Patrick,
you.
Anything you'd like to anything else you'd like to add in, Patrick?
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. And, we'll continue down here to look at ways to cut people's taxes and get the monies back in West Virginia constituents' hands.
Well, Patrick, we thank you for your service very much, and thanks for joining us here on Legislature This Week. We'll be right back after this important message.
Your heart is in the best hands. ModHealth Heart and Vascular is the highest ranked cardiovascular program in the state of West Virginia by the American College of Cardiology. Choose ModHealth. Feel the difference.
Welcome to Legislature This Week, brought to you by West Virginia News, the State Journal, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Legislature This Week is sponsored by Mon Health Systems, as well as SEVA WV and the West Virginia High Technology Consortium. Joining us now is Rebecca McPhail, the Executive Director of the West Virginia Manufacturers Association. Rebecca, welcome to Legislature This Week.
Thank you. Thanks for having me this morning.
Well, I know it's been an exciting time down there, and we'll talk a little bit about this big announcement that was just made at the Capitol. Been a year of a lot of, actually a year and a half or more of big announcements in West Virginia. The most recent one, the Senate has announced their tax plan. I know in talking to you, you've got a little bit of knowledge of it. What do you see coming out of that?
Well, I think I see the beginning of some negotiations. I mean, I think obviously tax reform has been a big topic and top of mind, not just for our industry, but for the whole state and our leadership here in the legislature. So we were pleased to see that maybe this is the beginning of some compromise, and we look forward to seeing what comes out of it. Obviously interested in evaluating the proposed rebate on inventory machinery and equipment tax. That is a continued difficult issue for manufacturing in terms of being an outlier in that space. So we'll see what happens.
Very good, very good. Speaking of manufacturing, it's been just a tremendous upward trajectory here of manufacturing announcements in West Virginia, both in terms of new plants and expanding current ones. In your business, you've got to be awfully excited about this.
Oh, absolutely. This has been sort of a tipping point. I think the last 18 months in West Virginia, we've been climbing to see if we can start to get to the top of the hill with turning around job loss and population loss. West Virginia has lost tens of thousands of jobs in manufacturing since its high point of nearly 80,000. So, this has been a fantastic time. There's a lot of momentum, and I tell you, I have to give a lot of credit to the Economic Development Department for the state of West Virginia. They've been very aggressive. The governor's office and obviously House and Senate leaders are getting the job done when it comes to clearing barriers for bringing these companies to the state.
Can you explain a little bit, let's tie these two first questions together a little bit. Can you explain a little bit how the inventory tax, because it was defeated in the amendment stage, okay? So how is the inventory tax going to help manufacturing? But more importantly, or just as important, is how does that help every common West Virginian?
Sure. West Virginia, we've been working on this. Actually, my predecessor worked on it. I've been at the WVMA for almost 10 years now. So this has been a long-standing issue. Having that tax wound into the Constitution the way it is has made it difficult to provide relief to the state's manufacturers. And when you start to drill down into that tax, you'll see that West Virginia is one of a handful of states that apply inventory machinery and equipment tax on manufacturers. So we're a real outlier, and that serves to disincentivize capital investment. So, again, kudos to the development office and legislative leaders in the past who figured out ways to work around that for developing new business through pilot agreements and those sorts of things. But certainly for long-range job stability and growth, we've got to look at being able to retain the companies that we have, and that's one of those barriers to doing that. So if you're a capital-intensive manufacturer, you use a lot of heavy equipment, you pay tax on that equipment every year, and that's a penalty. If you're using older equipment, it's a disincentive to updating your equipment in some cases. Similarly, with inventory, you are paying a tax on inventory that you hold, which means you're trying to get rid of it at a time when everyone wants, we become Amazon Prime, right? Everyone wants the product that they need in days, if not hours in some cases. So that creates some challenges when you're thinking about how you manage inventories. You're trying to avoid overpaying in terms of having too much on hand, but you can get caught flat-footed if a customer wants a big order and you don't have the product to meet the demand. So that's been a challenge, and frankly, that affects jobs. That tax takes away from our ability to invest in capital, invest in our employees. So it's been a problem for decades, and maybe we're on a path to addressing it, even if it takes a little time to do that.
Rebecca, Charles Young, our government affairs reporter, is with us as well, and he has a few questions. Charles?
Well, I kind of want to stay on this topic for a minute, if you don't mind, Rebecca. So I know you said this has been, a decades-long quest for you guys. The ultimate goal is to do away with this entirely. I know a lot of details are still coming out, but it looks like what's in the Senate plan is a 50% rebate for small businesses only. What do you think about this being applied to small businesses? It doesn't sound like it's all manufacturers. I know that in West Virginia, the vast majority of our businesses are small businesses.
Yeah, as I mentioned, Charles, I think we still have to evaluate the proposal. We have to see what is defined as a small business. Certainly, the larger manufacturers that have recently announced have had issues with that tax and have been granted pilot agreements to avoid that. So I think we should take a long, hard look at exactly what we're trying to accomplish in terms of economic growth and try to remove the barriers for doing that. So we'll see, I guess, again, to be determined how this plays out and what the effects will be.
Well, and then I also wanted to ask you about Senate Bill 188, the Grid Stabilization and Security Act. So this is intended to encourage the development of combined cycle natural gas power plants, is that right?
That is correct, and I should clarify that that's to develop that resource for electric generation into the merchant market, the broader PJM. So this is not a direct sale to consumers energy development goal, but again, to stabilize the broader PJM grid. We've seen a lot of weather events recently that have created some challenges. We see, unfortunately, other states shutting down their coal-fired generation. A plant in New Jersey was imploded in December to make way for battery storage for offshore wind development. Unfortunately, when it comes to weather-dependent energy sources, we don't have the technology yet to make that stable enough to fuel our electric grid. So being able to open West Virginia up, and just to go back a little bit, part of the reason that we are supportive of the bill is that we've lost some projects in the past. We've lost 3 similar combined cycle plant projects that have gotten tied up in the permit appeal process. And so the legislation is aimed at streamlining permitting, allowing the Department of Economic Development to define sites that make sense, that can environmentally sustain the type of development, and that would place those in close proximity to the natural gas supply source, which I think is very important when you talk about stability. Some of the challenges that we've had have been related to gas supplies, so this would help eliminate those challenges in the future. And most importantly, it would limit the time of appeals so that there's still a lot of time for public involvement and engagement, but we can't get hung up with frivolous appeals that chill investment of this type or that appear unfriendly to the natural gas power generation industry. So we see this as an opportunity. There's no subsidy involved, but really to send a signal that West Virginia is open for business when it comes to natural gas power generation.
Mm-hmm. And that bill has already passed the Senate. It is now before the House, right? It's in the committee process in the House?
That is correct. It was reported earlier this week and heads to economic development and tourism in the House of Delegates.
Okay. Well, and then the other one we wanted to ask you about was 2605, the Good Samaritan Law. Tell us a little bit about how that relates to manufacturing. I'm familiar with similar laws in other areas. What does this have to do with manufacturing?
We were asked, Charles, to present during the legislative interims that were held at Cacapen last fall on an issue that our companies actually brought to us. This is one of the things that I love about my job. We can talk with our members and we can find the challenges that they're encountering that keep them from being able to, in this case, be a good corporate citizen or community neighbor. So essentially we learned from our members and shared with the legislature that we've been advised by our counsel, our attorneys at the plant level, as well as our insurance providers, that in the case of a community disaster or emergency, we should not leave our facility. We should not go beyond the fence line, is the term that's used, to help in response out of fear of litigation. So the Good Samaritan law is exactly what it says. It provides some immunity to our members who provide assistance with emergency response. There's a tanker car that spills on the turnpike. They can go and they can help because they have the expertise, highly trained hazmat professionals, industrial fire professionals, and the equipment in some cases to respond that local fire departments might not have. And they can do that without fear of litigation.
Okay, and you said that's in front of Judiciary, and you're going to be following that this afternoon. That's what you got your eye on?
Yes, that is on the agenda for 1 o'clock this afternoon, pending change, of course, all subject to change.
Yes, as we've seen, the legislature is a total work in progress, and things change rather rapidly down there. Rebecca, you mentioned earlier that, that you've been with the association now for 10 years, and I would have to note that gives you a great look to be able to look at what was going on 10 years ago and now what's going on now. First of all, 10 years ago, did you ever think that we'd be talking about Nucor and Berkshire Hathaway Energy and all the other manufacturing and development that we're talking about here in West Virginia? Did you think that was possible 10 years ago?
Think it was possible, yes. Think we would actually get here in a few, and I say a few short years later. I mean, these sorts of evolutions take quite a while in some instances, but I think we've been on a fast track for about the last half a dozen years in terms of creating policies that enable us to promote West Virginia as a business-friendly state. And I think that is maybe the magic potion in all of this. I mean, we've really turned the tides thanks to some strong leadership and legislative leaders and our administration that understands the importance of making sure we're a state that's gaining population, that's gaining jobs, and is now focusing on some of the foundational issues, education, workforce, the things that are going to help us now, again, continue to climb that hill and meet the demands that we're going to have in the future because of all of this growth.
Let's talk workforce. I mean, one of the selling points of the governor's tax plan was, it'll help bring more people here. It's a big thing. It'll bring people here. We'll have more workers to choose from. Workforce is a major issue in West Virginia, is it not?
It's a significant issue, and I think you have to maybe qualify that a little bit further by saying a qualified workforce. So we, in the manufacturing industry, we have, fortunately, a lot of opportunities for folks that are just getting started in the workforce, and in fact, our companies are really committed to training up, if you will. So I think that it's important to note that some of the things that the legislature is working on now, really revolving around training and education and access to education, are important elements because we're in situations where we're competing against each other. Our companies in some regions of the state are competing against each other for what is a shallow skilled workforce pool.
Do you foresee, what are the three key things that have to happen this legislative session to continue this growth cycle?
I think we need to look at public education. I think what Senator Amy Grady is doing that really is a carry on from Speaker Roger Hanshaw's effort last year in the Third Grade Student Success Act is important. If we don't look at those types of foundational issues, and we as the business community and the employer community don't realize why they are so important in the near term, public education and some of the low outcomes that we've experienced may be a deterrent for getting people to come to West Virginia, professionals that are looking at that, young families. So that's something I think showing that we can commit to improving education in the short term is a benefit, but even more importantly, looking at that long term and the talent pipeline that we need to develop in West Virginia as employers, I think that is a critical piece, and maybe one that gets overlooked because that doesn't necessarily show a big economic impact, but it is a foundational issue that we need to be focused on. I think again, expanding some of our energy options in West Virginia, that continues to be important, making sure that those options flow into the merchant market and stabilize our grid, because we've got some unique needs when it comes to the companies that are located here regionally, and West Virginia can benefit economically by meeting those needs. And a third thing, there are so many. How do I pick just three? This is a little bit challenging, but I think, again, a lot of what's happening in the economic development space, there are several bills that deal with infrastructure development, making sure that our economic development office has the funding and the support that it needs to bring those new companies here. I think all of those things are kind of woven together. Maybe that's not just one bill, but it's a suite of things that we could do to improve the state.
So would it be safe to say that while we've come a long way, we still have a long way to go?
I think we've come a very long way, but there's a lot of opportunity to improve the conditions, some of the foundational conditions that we have in West Virginia, not necessarily related to the WVMA, but looking at these issues with the DHHR and PEIA, they impact the state long term. So, kudos to folks in the legislature for taking on some of these hard issues. Those are going to be what become transformational changes for the state. And it's at a time when we've got the momentum to make some transformational changes.
Excellent insight, Rebecca. We want to thank you for joining us. Anything else you'd like to add?
Other than we're almost halfway there, so I hope folks keep watching your show and following.
Absolutely. Well, we thank you for joining us. This is Legislature This Week, and we'll be right back after this important message.
Here's the better opportunity you're looking for. Enhancing health and wellness of our community, one patient at a time. Apply today at monhealth.com/careers. Choose Mon Health. Feel the difference.
Welcome to Legislature This Week, brought to you by West Virginia News, the State Journal, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Legislature This Week is sponsored by Mon Health Systems, as well as SEVA WV and the West Virginia High Technology Consortium. We are pleased and privileged to welcome Steve Roberts, the president of the West Virginia Chamber of Commerce. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on. We are experiencing great times in West Virginia, and I'm so enthusiastic to get to talk to you about whatever is going on in our state right now.
Well, Steve, you and I are both what we would call old timers, I guess. So we remember when the times weren't so great in West Virginia and when things were kind of lean. Did you ever think we would see the type of growth we've seen in the last 5, 6, 7 years?
I'm wondering if I'm the happiest person in the Capitol today. The fact that we ended 2022 with record job growth. In 2010, we had 739,000 jobs in West Virginia. We ended 2022 with 762,000 jobs in West Virginia. We have huge budget surpluses. I can remember when we were trying to just hold things together in our office, they used to say with chewing gum and baling wire. Now we've got huge budget surpluses. We have a growing economy, and this is a time to be enthusiastic about West Virginia's future. If you are a young person, West Virginia is a great place to be right now.
Well, you know, I think that excitement too might be because there's been some movement from the Senate on tax reductions. And, you know, we're almost to the halfway point of the legislative session. The Senate announced their plan this morning. I know you got some insight there. What are your thoughts on their plan?
And that's why I'm so enthusiastic and why I said I might be the happiest person in the Capitol today. The Senate has come out with a plan that we think the governor's office is likely to say looks good to them. We're hopeful the House of Delegates will certainly take the time necessary to look at the plan and recognize the value, because it does a lot of things and it helps a lot of people, and it does not raise any taxes. It cuts the personal income tax by 15%. And a 15% cut in our income tax is something that we can afford right now. It will not put a hole in our budget going forward, and it begins to make us much more competitive on the personal income tax front. In addition, everybody in West Virginia who owns a car will get a rebate on the personal property tax they pay on that car. In fact, they'll get all of the money rebated to them at no cost to the counties. So that is yet another big plus that comes out of the proposal that is being discussed in the Senate today. We also see a break for our disabled and wounded veterans that we have living in West Virginia, and if anybody deserves a tax break, it has to be that group. That's a good piece of this legislation. We eliminate the penalty for the marriage tax in this bill, and we have a rebate to small businesses that pay the inventory and equipment tax. So there is a lot in here. You know, if I could wave a wand, there would be some other things to do, but our view is we can do those in the future. We can have those conversations. This is a fantastic proposal that is on the table, and it is what the members of the West Virginia Chamber of Commerce have been saying for years will help move our state forward and make us much more competitive and much more attractive.
Well, we're going to sit on this topic, but I want to invite Charles Young, our West Virginia News Government Affairs writer, in on the conversation. Charles, your questions and thoughts for Stephen.
Sure. Good morning, Steve.
Hey, Charles.
You were talking about, the 15% in this proposal and said that this begins to make us more competitive. That makes it sound like you'd like to at some point see us, eliminate the tax or get closer to being competitive. Talk a little bit about that and where we landed on that number. 15 is a lot smaller than the 50% proposed by the governor. Why do you think that's a more reasonable bite out of the apple to take?
I think the 15 is a good number. At least it's a good number for the initial conversation, because it is coupled with the rebate in the car and truck tax. So there's a lot in here for consumers. Consumers on the high end of the income spectrum will appreciate the personal income tax reduction, and all consumers who own an automobile will be able to take advantage of this proposal by getting a rebate on the car tax that they pay, getting the whole amount rebated to them without taking any money away from the counties, which we agree is an important aspect to consider when we're doing this. Let me give an example. Right now, West Virginia's highest personal income tax bracket is 6.5%. But that applies to household income of just over $60,000. So we have a lot of people in West Virginia who are paying income tax at the highest rate. The highest rate, as an example, in South Carolina is 7%. So we're slightly better than South Carolina, but we are not better than many of the states that surround us. Moving from 6.5% at the highest bracket down to 5.75 is a significant move. And what was explained by Senate leadership this morning is that as sales increase and sales taxes increase, because people have more money in their pocket to spend, and they will spend it, there will be more revenue available to go farther on the personal income tax reduction in the future. So we're taking a sure bet now on, and we're optimistic about the prospects for the future. And we also think that it's important that we have enough money in the budget to fix PEIA, to help the public employees, to do what needs to be done for the school teachers, to make sure that we have adequate public safety services, and to make sure that the corrections department gets the necessary money that they need to keep people working in corrections and to add the many jobs that they need to add in corrections. Charles, I know you've got other things you want to say. I just want to quickly say it's our estimate that we have 55,000 job openings in West Virginia today. Wouldn't it be wonderful if people began to come here to take those jobs? And making ourselves more competitive and more attractive is a way to get them to come here to take those jobs.
Well, the other thing I was going to ask you to remind us about is where the chamber came down on the Amendment 2 issue. I know, all the groups in the state took a side on that. Remind us where the chamber was back in that debate.
So the chamber was supportive of Amendment 2, but I'm very quick to say, we respect the voters. The voters had a different point of view about that. We don't blame the voters. If anything, we blame ourselves for not having a big enough megaphone to explain what this was all about. And we just accept that. So now we have an opportunity to see the people get their money back that they pay on the car tax, which Amendment 2 would have done. We have an opportunity for at least the smaller businesses to get their money back, half of their money back that they pay on the inventory and personal property tax. And this is important to small business. I was at my dentist office the other day, and my dentist probably employs, I'm guessing, 8 or 9 people, I'm estimating. But he was telling me what an enormous amount of personal property tax he pays because he has expensive equipment and the most up-to-date equipment, and he keeps all his records on computers so that if a patient needs to take a record somewhere else or moves or whatever, he can copy a disc. And well, that's an expensive way to do it, but it's the best way to do it. He pays a lot of tax under the personal property tax proposal. This gives him 50% of it back.
Steve, I would agree with all that. The one thing that I have to question, though, is that amendment was defeated soundly. Okay, we all agree on that point. Okay,
Yep.
So now the Senate has come back with the same proposal. They've cut it to 50%. They say it's for only 98% of the businesses. That's still a huge chunk of it. They say it won't affect the counties. That eliminates concerns. But you really can't argue. The governor's plan would have put more money in West Virginians' pockets than what the Senate plan does.
Well, one of the things that has concerned us is, and we agree with that point of view, but our question is, for how long? And that is really, we think, kind of the money question here. As a person I was just standing next to said, in West Virginia, our West Virginians have to drive to survive. Most West Virginians drive to their job. This gives them an immediate tax rebate for the money they paid on their car tax. So this helps that segment of our population very quickly. It also, by sort of staggering the personal income tax reductions, it gives us time to grow the economy from the bottom up. All of this money will come back into the economy in the form of consumer spending, and we will collect sales tax on it. And the cities that collect sales tax will collect sales tax on that money. and we think that that will lead to organic growth. So this is a program that, from a Chamber of Commerce point of view, has is a broader-based tax cut for more numbers of people, and could be the first of several steps to get where I think we'd all ultimately like to go, which is an economy that is running at such a premium level that it is throwing off enough tax money that we can have lower, flatter rates and pay for the services that we need and expect.
One of the things that the governor uses to tout his tax plan is the fact that, there's a number of national studies that indicate income taxes, cutting income tax, eliminating income tax is a great way to spur people growth. And I think we all agree we need more people to move to West Virginia. We need West Virginians to stay in West Virginia. The Senate proposal is not nearly as sexy and not nearly as toutable as, hey, we're cutting 50% of your income tax with the goal of cutting it all. What's your response to that concern?
Well, we actually have several points that we would make on that. There are a number of economies that have, a number of states that have low or no personal income tax that are not growing. So the single factor of the personal income tax is not by itself the indicator of growth. Earlier in this interview, I made reference to South Carolina, which is growing and which has a personal income tax that is higher than our highest tax rate for the tax brackets to which it applies in West Virginia. So what we think is you got to look at the whole picture. And the whole picture would include creating jobs, stimulating the economy. Putting more money in the pockets of consumers automatically stimulates the economy. And we also think that it's probably not possible to eat the whole elephant in one bite, but by doing this in partials, we're taking a good, solid first step. We're moving in the right direction. When the voters see the growth that comes from these kinds of economic proposals, there will be an appetite to go farther. And boy, did I mix a lot of metaphors there.
Charles, something else to add, please?
Well, I was just kind of going to ask Steve, I wanted to get your thoughts on the rebate elements of this. Throughout this whole tax process, rebates have kind of been seen as an alternative, as a workaround. It allows us to fulfill the constitutional requirement of collecting the tax, but then we'd give it right back. Do you think that's overly complicated?
It is a little complicated, but given the failure of Amendment 2, it may be the only option that we have. So one of the arguments that we made for Amendment 2 is, let's not have the complicated way of doing it. Let's have the simple way of doing it. But again, we respect the voters. The voters saw it differently. The voters had concerns about funding county government, and we respect that we did not have a big enough amplifier to be able to get the message across that would help voters recognize that they were going to get all that money back, that the counties would get all that money back. This plan is pretty cut and dry in that it doesn't take any monies from the counties to begin with, and it simply takes from state revenues to reimburse those who have paid the car tax.
Steve, anything else you'd like to add for us today?
Well, I would say this is a monumental day at the West Virginia State Capitol. We are looking at a budget surplus in this fiscal year that may exceed $2 billion. We've had budget surpluses in the last 2 fiscal years that exceeded $1.6 billion. That's out of a $4.5 billion general revenue budget. So it's time to really look seriously at cutting taxes and filling holes. It's important to keep in mind we've got holes to fill, and that's why we think this proposal is very meritorious and should receive the highest level of attention, concern, and debate to come to the best possible conclusion.
Well, Steve, we agree with that, and we certainly thank you. It will be interesting to see how it plays out. We've heard some feedback from some House members that have some concerns, and we also understand that there is probably enough votes. As somebody told me, if you put this governor's bill on the Senate floor, Republicans aren't going to vote against a tax cut. So it will be interesting to see how this plays out. We certainly thank you for joining us, and we thank you for your years of dedication to West Virginia, the business community, and the people of West Virginia. Steve Roberts, he is the president of the West Virginia Chamber of Commerce, and this is Legislature This Week. And we'll be right back.
Your heart is in the best hands. McPhail Heart and Vascular is the highest ranked cardiovascular program in the state of West Virginia by the American College of Cardiology. Choose McPhail. Feel the difference.
Welcome back to Legislature This Week, brought to you by West Virginia News, the State Journal, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Legislature This Week is sponsored by Mon Health Systems, as well as SEVA WB and the West Virginia High Technology Consortium. Joining us now is Stephen Allen Adams, the West Virginia State Government reporter for Ogden Newspapers, which is one of our news sharing partners. Stephen, welcome to the show. You've been doing a great job. We read your stuff every day and share it with our audience, so thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, John. Happy to be here.
Also with us is West Virginia News Government Affairs reporter Charles Young, and it's been a busy day in the legislature already. So, Stephen, why don't you give us insight into the big announcement out of the Senate?
Sure, big announcement out of the Senate. They just had a press conference here about 10:30 with the vast majority of the Republican caucus, even a couple Senate Democrats, notably State Senator Bob Plymouth out of Wayne County, a Democrat. But they introduced their answer to the tax cut plan that was introduced on behalf of the governor and passed by the House very early on in the session. And the Senate plan is simply this. They're going to do a 15% across the board personal income tax cut across all 6 brackets. Now, we don't know how that's going to look, so we don't know what the percentages are going to be and how that affects that, but that's their answer to the 50% cut, which is, of course, 30% the first year, then 10%, then 10% in the governor's plan. They also want to eliminate the marriage penalty for those filing taxes in the state of West Virginia. They also now want to do a rebate on tangible personal property taxes for motor vehicles. That is something that Senate Republicans have been kind of critical of in the past, because they would have much rather have been able to eliminate that outright had Amendment 2 passed and given them the ability to do that. They've not been happy with the idea of rebate, so this is a very interesting kind of 180 for them. They also want to do what they call a tangible personal property tax cut for machinery and equipment and inventory taxes for small businesses. Now, we don't know exactly what that looks like and how that's defined. They said something along the lines of people to file sole proprietorships, LLCs, that sort of thing, but it would not apply to corporate net income taxes. So it's meant to gather as many small businesses as possible, while excluding big box such as Walmart or Home Depot and things of that nature. So it's meant to be very targeted. And then they also want to do a homestead real property tax rebate for veterans that are either 90 to 100% disabled to help them out. And that's really kind of the big pieces of this plan. It's a plan that is supposed to return $600 million back to taxpayers.
Yeah, Charles and I were talking about it a little bit in between segments here, and I know we both have a lot of questions. The first one I have is we've gone back to the inventory tax, which lost the people's vote, overwhelmingly lost the people's vote. What's the reaction you're hearing there in the Capitol halls? I mean, any chatter from the House or even from the Senate in regards?
Sure. I have had the opportunity to talk to House Finance Committee Chairman Vernon Criss, Republican out of Wood County, which is kind of given the standard road response you'd expect to hear from this. When we get it, we will review it and give it proper consideration, things of that nature, which, by the way, the Senate plans to suspend rules this afternoon to pass their version out. Now, I don't know if that's going to be its own bill or if they're going to amend that into the tax bill that the House passed, the governor's tax bill. So I'm not sure exactly which way they're doing that. But I can tell you chatter on the House side seems to be of annoyance a little bit, especially on a couple of these things that the Senate has made very clear they're against, such as doing a rebate on tangible personal property taxes. There seems to be some annoyance on that side about that because that's something they have said they are against. Now, the thing that makes this a little bit different than the Amendment 2 fight is the simple fact that since these are tax rebates that would show up on your personal income tax filings or corporate net, depending how that works, it's a situation where the counties still get to collect their money up front. It doesn't hurt the counties at all because they still get to keep their money, the tax collections that they get from that. It would be money that would be returned to taxpayers through general revenue when they file their tax returns. So that makes it a little bit different, and so I'd be surprised if you heard any of the counties really throw a fit about it because it doesn't really hurt them in the scheme of things.
That answered one of my big questions. That was next on the agenda. Charles, your input and thoughts and questions for Stephen there.
Well, I wanted to ask Stephen, I was going to say, it kind of stuck out to me when I saw the press release that, President Blair and Majority Leader Takuba were quoted in this, but I didn't see any comments from Finance Committee Eric Tarr. Was he present there this morning, and do you read anything into him not being quoted in this statement?
No, I don't read anything about that at all. He was present and actually did answer questions from the press in regards to how some of this would work, which was helpful to us. He is very much known to give very few interviews. In fact, he's been better about this session. Traditionally, he doesn't like to give interviews to anybody except for live interviews, radio, TV, things of that nature. So he doesn't traditionally do too many print interviews. He's kind of tried to change that this session, which I'm thankful for as a reporter. I'm sure you are too, because you kind of need to have that explanation. So I know in 2021 he got burnt, particularly by broadcast press, over the fight. Then over personal income tax phase out because there was going to be some trade-offs and they were going to eliminate some tax breaks that the broadcast industry gets for that, which caused the broadcast industry to hit him pretty hard in 2021. So after that, he was very negative on the press for a while. He's kind of warming back up. So he was present. We also heard from State Senator Amy Grady, Republican out of Mason County, who spoke on that, as well, again, as State Senator Bob Plymel, Democrat out of Wayne County. So they do have some, there's only 3 Democrats in the state Senate, but they do at least have one of them that appears to be on board for this plan.
One of the things, go ahead, Charles, I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask, the other thing in the press release is it says starting with a 15% decrease. Is that an indication that this is a first step, that there may be other phases to this?
Yes, we haven't seen the specifics of their plan yet because the bill has not been introduced, or if they're amending it into the prior bill, we just haven't seen that text yet. But going to your question before, Senator Tarr did explain that there are triggers that are going to be in their bill language that would allow for a phase out of the personal income tax over time. It would be tied to the increase in the consumer sales and use tax. If it increases $105 million above estimates that are set by the State Department of Revenue, that would trigger a certain set of decreases. Now, what the percentages are like on that, I don't have that information, but that is the goal. So their language, bill language, would include some triggers that would allow for the phase out of the personal income tax over time.
One of the things that I think Governor Justice likes to use to push his plan is, hey, we're eliminating up to 50% of the income tax, personal income tax. That'll help bring more people here. That'll help people make the decision to stay in West Virginia. Quite honestly, this proposal from the Senate has a lot of interesting tax ideas, but it's not nearly as sexy as saying, hey, we're eliminating half our income tax and we're going to eliminate it all eventually.
Well, that's kind of fun. It's funny you bring that up because I know a couple weeks ago Senate President Blair was getting mad at reporters because we would report it as a 50% cut. And it is a 50% cut over time. He would always he corrected me a couple of times, like, no, it's a 30% cut, then a 10%, then a 10%. At one point, a few weeks ago, they were even talking about a full 50% cut in a single year. Now, it's interesting to me that we have went from that to a 15% cut with triggers, so that's kind of interesting as well. But yeah, you're talking about a plan, like I said, the Senate plan now would return $600 million back to taxpayers. The governor's plan over time, I believe the last fiscal note I saw would be, by the time it's fully implemented, I think around $1.4 billion. So, I mean, you're talking, big differences in what they would do. One of the biggest complaints from the Senate Republican caucus is they do believe that there is that the governor's plan is not sustainable over the long period of time. It also relies on future legislators and future governors to keep it up as well. So this is a plan apparently that they feel a lot more comfortable with doing. So we'll see what the governor has to say about it here shortly for his briefing.
Well, and let's talk a little bit, if we can. The difference there is at least $1.2 billion the governor had originally said. And then, so they're saying, oh, we don't have that much, so it's only going to be $600 million. And let us not forget, too, the biggest difference that I see with that is again, the majority of the governor's money was going to all West Virginians through personal income tax. The $600 million proposal from the state Senate does have that carve out for 15% personal income tax. It has a carve out for car tax rebate, but it has a 50% carve out for the machinery tax rebate to small businesses. And let us not forget, the people of West Virginia overwhelmingly defeated Amendment 2, which would have done that tax elimination. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's going to be the interesting thing. I'll be curious to hear what the governor has to say about that, because that has been his argument the entire time, especially with fighting against Amendment 2, which he was very successful on, going around the state and kind of rallying opposition to that, trying to make the argument that Amendment 2 would really just be targeted to businesses and corporations and out-of-state interests and things of that nature, whereas, a phase-out of the personal income tax, originally a 10% plan under the governor's plan from the summer, would benefit everybody. And I think you could still make that same argument in this as well. Sure, everyone will get that 15% cut, but we don't know what the percentages are like, so we don't know how that's going to be weighted across the six tax brackets. The governor's plan on paper definitely still benefits and captures a wide swath of taxpayers from all walks of life, whereas the Senate plan is very narrowly focused. So that is certainly something that the governor, who has not been shy about attacking the Senate, though he's tried to kind of tamper that to some extent, that could bring out some attacks from the governor on this. With that said, though, the governor has also been pretty vocal about wanting to hear the Senate's alternative plan. He's called for that. He said he's willing to negotiate and willing to listen on that. So it's possible that he might see this as a stepping stone for them to somehow meet in the middle somehow. So it'll be really curious to see how those discussions play out. Tomorrow's day 30, so we just got 31 days left in this 60-day legislative session. So they got some time to work it out.
Stephen, absolutely excellent input. Charles, anything else to add? I know we've got some press conferences to get to, so anything else to add, Charles?
Nothing else for me. Thanks, Stephen. We appreciate your time.
Stephen, we appreciate it. Anything to wrap up, Stephen, real quick?
No, we'll just be watching to see what happens today, since apparently the Senate's going to have split session and do this afternoon. Again, I'll be curious to know if it's its own bill or if it's an amendment perhaps to the bill that's already gone through that has the governor's plan on it. And I'm, like Charles, I'll be very curious to see what the governor has to say about that here shortly.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen Allen Adams of Ogden Newspapers, Charles Young of West Virginia News. This is Legislature This Week. Until next time, thank you.
Your heart is in the best hands. McPhail Heart and Vascular is the highest ranked cardiovascular program in the state of West Virginia by the American College of Cardiology. Choose McPhail. Feel the difference.